Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 324, A Young Woman's Declaration. Hey everybody, I'm very excited to be here with you guys and talk about this chapter and have a good time. This chapter, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to try and keep my emotions out of it, and I'm going to try to give you the best rundown of the chapter that I can and really try and speak to you about what the chapter does well and what I think might be some of the actually no, I don't know if I'll actually go there because I only have neutral to good points in my head. But before we get into it, I want to let you know I was hoping to get another video out before this one, but chances are you'll see it. It's something about Ochako and comparing it to the Endeavor moment, the Can't You See Kid moment. That chapter came up, that video is probably coming up with this chapter. Feel free to check it out. That's a much more in-depth conversation about what I actually think is one of the weirder areas. I tried to rush that one out and get it out before today, before this video, but didn't work out. My schedule was really bad and then it took really long to render, so I apologize. I really did want that one ahead of this chapter video. But if you're into talking about rhetorics and if you're in for like a relatively neutral discussion on something I thought was legitimately cool, feel free to check out that video. It's already uploaded on the channel along with this one. Anyway, okay, so this chapter, A Young Woman's Declaration, is a chapter that gives us the answer to Ochako's question in a way I think is the best way to do it. We will talk about it a little bit more. And if you read the fan translations, this is only covering what the official translation wrote for the answer, or specifically what the official translation did. If you go and you look at the fan translation that's on the internet, you're going to get it's different. It's fundamentally different. It's actually ridiculous how different it is, because that was actually a really crucial part. All my commentary is going to be locked to the official translation, and this is a really critical time. It's unfortunate that the fan translation is so different. I will let you know that the first preliminary translation from the spoilers is in conflict with the fan translation and in agreement with the official translation. But again, we'll get there. Now, before that, I want to say, just in terms of how I felt about this chapter and how I feel overall about Ochako, because, you know, Ochako in this channel, she has a very storied history here. It's not really her fault, it's the author. But I just have a really quick clip from chapter 322. I just want this to be good rhetoric. I just want this to be something I can legitimately go like, yeah, you know, there's a lot of nuance there. There's a lot of really good feelings there. I don't want it to be something as basic as heroes help heroes, or family helps heroes, or friends help heroes. Heck, if Ochako goes down the line and says, like, heroes are saved partly by the people that they save. If you want to go down that line, that'll be wonderful. You know, I would love that. Okay, so, as you saw there, I pretty much listed out what would make me happy, and when you come into this chapter, I gotta tell you, I'm happy. I got what I wanted. I didn't want a simple answer. I got a very nuanced answer, and the things that I saw in the chapter tell me the author knows that he was in a really precarious situation, which I'm very happy to see, and I will explain that to you when we get there. So overall, I am fully happy with the thing that we got, because Ochako's answer ultimately veers towards people help people. I know. Wow, who would have thought? People help people. This is something we've been talking about for a very long time. If you've been following the channel, you know what my rhetoric's about. Now, I will say, because this is going to be another one of those critical turning points in the fandom, especially if Ochako gets shafted later on. But this has the possibility of being a chapter that people will reference as a way of showing that Ochako isn't that great. And the reason that might happen is because ultimately the stuff that Ochako is saying makes sense from the perspective of a reader. When Ochako's implying who it is that should be helping heroes, you know, again, she's telling us what we know. She's preaching to the choir, but in context is the Hero Academia universe that requires it. But that effect of her saying something that's obvious, there are people that might just take that at face value, and they might be a little bit more aggressive towards Ochako and not take into account the context. That overall struggle, the struggle between what the universe knows and what the reader knows, the author, I think, is very aware of it. And that ultimately led into the author using a much more visual story. If you were to just take the text from chapter 324 and read through it, you would miss about 30% of the story that's being told because specifically of the way that the images were joined up with them. There are some visual cues that do not show up in the text in any which way, or not referenced in the text in any which way. So ultimately, this is, if things go badly for Ochako in the future, which I don't think they will, and I'll tell you why later. There might be people that use this and say that this was kind of boring if they strip away the visuals from it, and if they look at just the fact that, well, I already kind of knew that. And so when it comes down to that, I would say, like, if you're one of the kind of person that wants to defend Ochako, or you want to be fair about it, ultimately you have to remember Ochako's greatest sin is that she's in Hero Academia. Ochako on paper is a wonderful character. Ochako's journey is the journey of a civilian going from being a civilian to being a hero. Ochako has the most realistic and fleshed out coming of age story of anyone in that classroom, and this is something I will always advocate for. It's not Ochako's fault that she's with literal gods in terms of development. Like, Izuku is self-sacrificial to a fault. Ida and Shoto are legacies, and Bakugo's he's named after victory. Bakugo's just gonna win. Kirishima had his heroic event earlier, and he was able to use that to motivate him. It's not Ochako's fault that she's a normal person coming into that classroom. The author is aware of the challenges with Ochako's rhetoric because of the stuff that he does in this chapter, but ultimately what he doesn't give us the laziest option that he could have done. He goes the extra mile and tries to make this amazing, or tries to make Ochako's moment. I don't think it's serviceable. I think it's above serviceable. But let's say serviceable just for bare minimum. It's at bare minimum serviceable. Which, when you consider the rhetoric itself, this horrible question of who helps heroes when they're in trouble, when this question is being answered everywhere else. When you consider like the optics of this, like, yes, this is actually really impressive that he was able to do this. When you look at the chapter, I will say, when it comes to dealing with the rhetoric, it is masterful, because this is showing an incredible awareness of the weaknesses of locking Ochako into this. And there are many, many tricks that are going into the chapter, and they're all relatively sophisticated. Now, for me personally, I almost cried at the chapter. I'm not going to say I cried, but assume I did. I almost cried at the chapter, and it wasn't Ochako, please. Ochako will never make me cry. No, it was Koda's moment. So as a reader, not as a reviewer, as a reader, if it makes me feel something, that's a victory. I read Black Clover. I just want to feel good. I just want to feel something, man. My emotional landscape is like a barren tundra. I just want to feel something, and this chapter made me feel something. Honestly, this is something you're going to notice with Ochako, but Ochako can be divorced from this, and really, you could divorce the whole who helps heroes when they're in danger rhetoric, or when they're suffering. You can divorce that from the chapter, and you still have a really strong moment with Koda. Koda's moment doesn't need a lot, and this is actually something really cool when it comes down to it. With Ochako's chapter, she has so much that you can tell that the author really tried to plan this out. Usually, when you have a lot that you need to justify, there's a tendency to try and write a lot to make sure you check out all the boxes. Ochako's approach, or Ochako's moment, is very methodical, very planned out, very intentional. Everything in Ochako's moment is like a finely tuned machine. But, when you have that, what you ultimately end up with is you get a very intellectual kind of experience. And in terms of the experiences that we've gotten for this quick, let's tell Izuku how we feel, Ochako's is probably the most intellectually engaging, because there's a lot of things going into it. And that's why I could make a whole other video talking about a whole other aspect adjacent to Ochako. But there is something to be said for moments like Ida. Ida's moment is very simple. Ida just tells us what he's about. Ida doesn't need anyone else to look at him and give context to what he is saying. Ida says what he says, and you understand it fully. The example here is that Ochako's doing stuff, and you need Ida next to Izuku telling him, hey, Izuku, this is what Ochako's doing. When the author does that, he's doing that because not only does Izuku need to hear it, but he needs to build it up for Ochako, and he needs to make sure that the readers get it. These kind of moments are what ultimately tell you that he's really trying to get a particular idea out. And similarly with Koda, Coda doesn't need that much to make me cry. Coda only needs 3 panels and I'm in. I'm 100% in. I just need to see him running towards Izuku. I'm in. So you ultimately see really it's a difference between the emotional response and the intellectual approach. Now, mind you, some people will be taken away by Ochako because at the end of the day, Ochako is still also getting really cool stuff. But Ochako's approach has all the markings of very intentful. I want to make sure the readers understand this particular thing, and I have to give it this much framework because otherwise the readers might not get it. The fact that Ochako has Nezu narrating her, and she has Coda, and someone actually made a really good point. Jason Thomas, one of the commenters made a point that Best Jeanist narratively might have been there to make the situation worse so that Ochako could come in and make the situation better. Yes, possibly. So ultimately, when you have this, you have really interesting case studies when it comes to 323, 324, and heck, if you compare back to Ida's moment as well. Ultimately, you know, does this mean that Ochako's moment is somehow inferior to Koda's moment? No, they shouldn't be compared. This is apples to oranges. Ochako's moment does something very different compared to the rest of the moments that we've gotten here, and the author is trying to do his best. But ultimately, as to the reason why Ochako needed to have so much being packed into her stuff, it's because of how busted that particular rhetoric was, I think, in my opinion. It's just that rhetoric is just toxic in terms of touching it in, like, when it comes to writing, it's just such a it is such a precarious little rhetoric because of how silly it is that this person is still having it in the context of Hero Academia. Again, not silly when you consider that Ochako is a normie coming into being a hero, but just so much going into it. But overall, it gets a lot out of me, so I really appreciate talking about it. Now, any other things to cover for general notes? No, I don't think any more general notes. So let's just move into the chapter proper, chapter 324. We have a lot to talk about. So page 1 is, I think, a wonderful cover page. I really like this. And Ochako starts off by saying, I always love seeing people happy. Now, here's the first big trick that the author does. The author is calling back to joint training. And when I did the joint training review video, I said that the thing about joint training is that it sets up a lot of rhetorics for a lot of different people. You can't take away joint training and have a coherent story. As much as people dislike joint training has narrative purpose. Now, when it comes to Ochako in joint training, what the author did is that he pretty much reused the exact same setup that he did in joint training, and I'll show you the picture right here because there are some really neat things. So in the Viz translation, my parents always look so exhausted, which is painful to see. That's almost word for word. Might be some translation liberties. My parents always looked exhausted. It was rough. And when I first saw heroes in action for the first time, look at chapter 212. So when I first saw a hero in action, what I really noticed were the expressions on everyone's faces. My gaze went straight to the face in the crowd. So pretty much, he used the exact same narration across both pages. Of course, the difference is in the imagery. Now, to speak about that, is it bad that he reused the exact same rhetoric as a setup? No, not really. It's been 100 chapters. He 100% needs to do it, and this is actually one of the situations where you do want to repeat the rhetoric, especially because this goes into an expansion. Just to very quickly show you, like on chapter 212, you'll notice that there's this night guy here. So this was actually a pretty good little detail of continuity. When we later see more of the flashback, we see that the night guy is there, which says, oh, this is the same flashback from chapter 212 just expanded upon, which is a really cool effect. So that's the first note to really have about page 1 and page 2. It's an expanded thing. One thing to point out is that I don't think you will see the dog person in 212. But that might be because he was covered up by a narration box. It's still relatively neat. I think it was ultimately a good effect here. The juxtaposition and the differences were also good. People also pointed out that this baby here was shown when Shigaraki was thinking about everything he wants to destroy. I know that one commenter, White Despair, is thinking this baby's going to be important, or just going to be a nod to Shigaraki. But really, when I see babies, I just think like that's just the symbol of Shigaraki wants to destroy the future. Kids are always the symbol of the future, so that's probably what that ultimately means. Page 2 is a really pretty page. You got a lot of cool stuff going into it, and it's really neat. Page 3 is the people start looking over at Izuku page. Like, they point out that he's kind of worn out and he's looking ragged. And then we have a giant mutant girl saying that he's been fighting, and she points out that he's been fighting the whole time. So worthwhile, and that sets up what she did later. It is pretty cool that just a random character came in, but I think it's just because she's so cool. Now, we keep seeing this guy that's been yelling at Ochako. And the thing is, this is one of those moments where it's like, I don't think Ochako can hear the one random guy during a storm when she's standing atop an 8-story building. Or something that looks like an 8-story building, like, comparatively. I don't think she can hear it. I think this is probably still, like, one of the worst options here. You should not have sent her up to that roof, but whatever. Drama, right? Drama. But legitimately, I think it's one of the worst things here. Now, again, coming into the visual aspect of the storytelling, look at the guy's shirt. This guy likes heroes. This guy has an All Might shirt. This guy wants to be saved. This guy is quite literally wearing the symbol of peace. This guy wants to be comforted. So we go here. He's like the big poster child here. We go into page 4, and he's saying, "Are you asking us to get covered in filth too?" And it's like, let me just first tackle this. This is just unfortunate because the public is exaggerated to a point where now it's starting to become a little bit unreasonable. God forbid that during a crisis, it would be nice if you help out your fellow community instead of just running away and hiding behind fortified walls. God forbid that when disaster strikes, when a natural disaster is there, when something is wrong, you, instead of running away from a person who is below a building, instead of doing that, you try and help. God forbid that you do little acts of heroism. Like, mind you, I don't think this guy should be fighting in the streets. But come on, basic human decency. This is one of those moments that really tells you that Hero Academia, like, this is like definitely stepped 100% into, like, this is just ridiculous. What would you do in an actual apocalyptic disaster type event? Like right now, you know how it goes when there's giant earthquakes. It's not just the officials that come in to try and get people out of a disaster. Other people come up and they try to help. People try to dig people out of the mud. People try to dig people. People try to save people when they can. Where is this common, I will try and do my best? Mind you, like towards the chapter, we get a really good note. But this is probably one of the most ridiculous lines that really shows you that the society is extremely sheltered, far beyond what our society is like. Like, just to give you examples, like, remember when those kids got stuck in Thailand in a cave? There were people who weren't even trained military members who went into that cave to try and help. Heck, when there's natural disasters in any part of the Caribbean, usually you have all the community coming together, sharing food, or like maybe sharing a generator. You know, again, little acts of kindness. And this ties to the whole thing in Hero Academia. We want to get to a point where the civilians are capable of doing nice things. We want to get to a point where the civilians don't just go out, see a kid running around in the streets without a parent, and he looks distraught, and say, oh, a hero's going to come and help. No. Everyone should do what they can safely do. And so that's hopefully what we get at the end of the chapter. But yeah, no. If there was ever a part that just made them ridiculous, it's this one. God forbid. I asked this in the live stream, but I really wonder how would Hero Academia Society react if they suddenly got invaded by, let's say, China. Like, were these people legitimately just kind of... Do they think they don't have a... Do they think they can get through life without helping out one another, without the presence of an official or an authority? It's just a ridiculous line that really just shows an exaggerated form of the society. Mind you, not everyone's like him, but God, man, if there was one line that got me, it was that one. Now we go on. Ochako says, like, no, obviously not. You do not need to be covered in filth. The heroes are the ones that covered in filth. So when she's going into that, it's just like, yeah, let them have a moment to get cleaned up. And that is completely appropriate. Ochako is very right. I think everyone could agree that, yeah, like, care about the people. Appreciate. It's appreciation. It's all about appreciation. Now we go into page 5, which I think is one of the best pages. You know, you have people cheering on Ochako. First, let's talk about the wording. Ida comes in there to give context to Ochako. And again, when you see the characters doing this, it's one, building Ochako up, and two, the author's doing it to make sure that we all are all on the same page. Because, you know, if things aren't said out loud in a manga, people are never going to be sure. Or, you know, that kind of person is never going to be sure. Ida goes into it talking about Ochako's doing it for everyone else and for Izuku as well, fighting for their right to smile again. I actually like the line of fighting for the right to smile again. Yes, Ida has a right to smile. Izuku has a right to smile. Heroes have a right to smile, naturally, not just because they're supposed to. Now, in terms of the visual storytelling, what was really good was Ochako rubbing her nose. It's a beautiful shot, because vulnerability is really good, especially when you're about to go into a thing about being a child. And if you notice, Ochako is snot-nosed in her flashback. So definitely, when I saw that, I thought snot-nosed kid. Because if you look at the page before that, on page 4, Ochako doesn't have any snot running down her nose. She's just rubbing her nose right here. It really did a lot for the chapter. It adds a level of innocence. It adds a level of vulnerability. It reminds you she's a child. It reminds you that she's doing her best. It was such a wonderful shot. I think the author really brought it when it came to the visual storytelling in the story. Page 6 is Izuku reacting to Ochako. Ironically, for me, Izuku was like the weakest part of the chapter because I wasn't really caring about his faces. I was just kind of taken away by everything else. Mind you, Izuku looks good here, but I think I would have liked maybe more internal thoughts from Izuku to really feel it. Like, I think Izuku might have needed a bit more framing than Ochako did. Just because it just, maybe it's also I've just been with Izuku for too long. That might also be an effect. But let's say of Koda, Uraraka, and Izuku's like my bottom of those three. So Ochako goes in with the honesty approach that, you know, if you want me to stand up here and reassure you, I'm sorry, we can't do that right now. So good for the honesty. She snuck a little bit of that in there. I like that because immediately after we see Best Jeanist, so I think the author knew what he was doing there, and he brought in Best Jeanist because Best Jeanist was the one that went in with the honest approach. So there's a nice little kind of continuity there. And Ochako says something that we mentioned last week when the civilians said that they just wanted a place to sleep. That is, yes, the heroes are in the same position as these dumb people. So good to have Ochako saying it out loud, again, because a lot of readers need Ochako to say it out loud. And also the civilians need Ochako to say it out loud. Now, Ochako goes on and she says again, seeing him in action, always desperate to save people, has given me much to think about. That is, again, just from chapter 212. Here's the part that I'm talking about. When I saw him struggling with the odds stacked against him, it got me thinking. Again, you know what? The author was, again, using the framing, which is fine. Because he needs to do this because this is a recurring theme. This is Ochako's personal theme. He knows what he's doing. Page 7 is now the montage of various heroes. When a hero is hurting, when heroes are hurting, this was a setup for where she started to answer. So I won't talk about that because it's on the next page. But looking at the visuals, we have Aizawa there, which is cool to know that he's still in the hospital. But he's looking at a monitor, so I'm actually really curious about what's going on. Above that, you can also see that Bakugo, Ida, and Izuku are standing together, which is appropriate because those are the three that are interlinked along with Ochako. Endeavor getting a nice page here was also worthwhile because this is also about being nice towards Endeavor. Then we go into what I think is actually the best part of this whole little thing. First thing, Ochako, cute Ochako is cute. I really think I have a soft spot for kids. I think that's what's going on with me. This is a really cute shot of Ochako. But what I really enjoyed here is Ochako is looking at the people's faces, and then her father is the one to correct her. That's a really important thing because it shows that there was something that needed to be corrected. And in this case, it's not just about looking at the people who are happy. It's about looking at the people that made the person happy. But what you'll notice, also, like you can see that the night guy is right here, right? That's pretty cool. But what you'll notice is that Ochako corrects that really quickly. So really, you gotta thank Ochako's dad for being like, yo, like look at the hero. Even though he may not have known what he did, it's a good moment. And it's important because it shows that Ochako needed to be corrected. But then again, she's a child. That makes sense. People need to grow and they need to learn. But this ultimately comes back into the theme of the chapter, that being that, hey, we're kids. We're still learning, you jerks. And of course, we see Eel Boy. And Eel Boy is the guy that Twice killed when he caught Toga and Compress, if I recall. Eel Boy wasn't in chapter 212. This is likely the author being like, oh yeah, I can kind of insert him here and add some continuity to the story, which I think is a good move. Do I think Eel Boy was always planned to be in this chapter from the moment that 212 came out? No, of course not. That's dumb. That's really insane. But when you're writing, you sometimes end up with an overflow of elements that it would be really cool if you add more connectivity to it. Anyway, we see Eel Boy there. And here is where we have the shot of Snot-Nosed Ochako. So this shot is what actually informs the previous shot, because you see the snot coming out of her. And it's just, again, showing the vulnerability of a child. I think this is probably like some of the most beautiful stuff that you'll probably see for the next 10 chapters here. The guy was just really intelligent with how he used these kind of shots. Now, this page, again, page 8, is one of the most intelligent pages for the chapter, not only because of what's going on with Eel Boy and Ochako, but because of what happens after Ochako says, please lend him your strength so we have a shot at smiling together in the future. The critical thing here is so we have a shot at smiling together in the future. And then look at the way that Toga's panel is framed. Toga's panel is not perfect. It kind of encroaches on the panel of Ochako screaming, which is just to say that this image came out of nowhere. Like, she said this, and it's like all of a sudden, brain blast, something showed up in her mind. The issue here is really, look at the corner of the page. This corner is coming into the so we have a shot at smiling together in the future. The read here is, oh wait, it's together doesn't just mean heroes and civilians, but also maybe some of the people that society has left behind, the villains. So what this page should tell you is Ochako's rhetoric has not yet been fully fleshed out. Ochako now needs to take Toga as an idea and reintegrate her into this overall framework that she has developed about heroes suffering. She needs to figure this stuff out. So this is the author pretty much coming up to the reader, extending his hand and saying, hey, Ochako's not done growing. I have some more things I need to do. The suddenness of how this idea comes in there guarantees that. Give me time. It's going to have to do with Toga and ultimately what Ochako is going to integrate the villains into. I think that's really fair. So if you're a fan of Ochako, just hope that when the Ochako Toga moment happens, it's no longer about Ochako's failing love life with Izuku. Fingers crossed. Okay. That said, Eel Boy is in this image. Is it a coincidence that the person that was killed by a villain is in the same page as a villain? I don't think so. Here's something that's important to note. It's not important for this chapter, but in general, Eel Boy, or I'm going to call him Eel Man, because he really looked like a man by the time he caught Toga and Twice. Sorry, Compress. Eel Man, he came in with really interesting rhetoric when he caught the villains. He said, like, I understand that you might have problems with society, but this isn't the way of going about it. And he caught them. He didn't kill them, he caught them. And then, what happens? Twice kills him. So, really think about that. The villains get upset at the fact that Twice was killed, but what about the guy that was actually being merciful to them? Remember, the villains are dicks. And in this case, the villains are really children, because this is the behavior of children. The villains don't understand things until it happens to one of the people they care about. And this kind of mentality, it ain't good enough. The villains 100% need to pay for this. Like Toga crying at the fact that villains' lives aren't worthwhile. No, like I feel that because she legitimately has a compromised mental state. Like she doesn't understand, but you have to take this in full context. Ultimately, what we have here is a situation where the villains are getting upset that Twice got killed, but what exactly gives them the right to kill a hero who was being relatively merciful towards them? If anything, Twice's response to a hero who was being merciful is the thing that says this is why villains end up dying. It's because sometimes situations grow way too crazy, and what options are left at that point? Mind you, Twice was a preventative kill, because if you don't kill Twice and you couldn't convince him, he's gonna destroy everyone if he makes a second Shigaraki. But still interesting. Like if you were to ask me, seeing that Eel Boy is on there, there's no way that the author isn't aware of the of the optics of the villains killed this guy before they went out and complained about twice dying. Like, the author has to know, so he might give us actually some pretty cool rhetoric on that. We go into page 9, and Ochako is saying that he needs the people's help. So if you notice on the narration, when heroes are hurting, the ones to protect them have to be ... This is the part that's different in the translation. In the fan translation, they say that we have to be the ones to protect them. But, as you can see, in Viz, Ochako never answers this question in a narration box. I think that is a ridiculously good move, because you don't want Ochako to answer that question directly. You need to tell it through the visual medium of the story. You need to tell it through the story and not through a narration box. The chapter gives us two really strong answers for who needs to protect heroes. The first time that you get it is when Ira gives context to Ochako. He says, Izuku, you as a person who are suffering, right now, Ochako is fighting for you. And of course, the civilians. So when you have Ira's answer, it's pretty much heroes help heroes. Heroes who understand what another hero is going through help heroes. This is consistent with the rest of Hero Academia. When you go into the rest of the chapter, page 9, you have Ochako saying what he needs is your help, please. Find it in your hearts to let him recover and rest. And so what you have here is ultimately the answer from everything after that is people help heroes. And when you say people help heroes, you have to go the next step and say, but a hero is a person like everyone else, because that's what Ochako is saying throughout the entire chapter. So it's not just people help heroes, people help people, and we come full circle. It's ultimately just be a nice neighbor, be a cool guy. Now, going back as to why it was important that the author did not answer that in a narration box, it's because the answer is extremely pedestrian. And I think a good chunk of readers might not fully appreciate the exact issue that occurs when you give such a pedestrian answer. But the reason that you do it is because that answer, people help people, is so basic that it might negatively affect what you're ultimately getting, because it gives a person an opportunity to say, but that's really normal. What you want to do in the situation when you have a really low energy answer, mind you, it might like really reach the core of the situation, but when you have a low energy answer, you actually are better off doing an answer through inference. You are better off drumming up the imagery of the situation. If you leave the answer unsaid in like 3 simple words, people help people, and you make the rest of the chapter be pretty much Ochako showing the answer, it engages a different part of a person's mind. And it ultimately creates the illusion of a more significant answer. Like when you see the build-up, and when you see like Izuku's crying face, when you see the little motion lines, everything is really intelligently done to make an answer that is really boring seem more powerful. And in this case, what the author is doing, he's bringing up the emotion so that when you come to the conclusion, people help people, you have the emotion also boosting that answer, and it makes that answer seem bigger than life, when really it isn't. So, if one thing you have to keep in mind, like the storytelling process is about engaging the reader and engaging their emotions, right? So when you have page 8 being the setup for the answer and page 9 being a gigantic thing of Ochako making a plea to the people, it creates a much stronger effect at the end of the day. Like, now mind you, like this is a relatively sophisticated concept, because what you're ultimately saying is like, when the words aren't enough, you have to use every other trick in your arsenal to make the words seem bigger than they are. But ultimately, the author is able to do it, which is why I thought he needed to be praised for this implementation. Anyway, continuing on that, I love what Ochako says. I love seeing Inko and Mitsuki kind of there. I love pointing out that, yeah, Izuku's just a regular high school kid. And I love this because I'm going to use Ochako's words to criticize the heroes. Izuku's a regular high school kid. And think about the fact that this kid is still learning. Look at what the adults around him did. The adults around him let him get to this point. Aren't kids supposed to be helped by the adults around them? In the previous chapters, I criticized the adults And people, sometimes people want to defend the adults and give them excuses. And I will touch on that very quickly, but it's ultimately important. Yeah, Izuku's a kid. The heroes failed him because they forgot, like Ochako says. He's a regular high school kid that still has things to learn, and you're letting him run wild. Now, mind you, on the other hand, the nuance is, this is a really hard situation. No one really knows what to do. They're all desperate. Like Ochako says, the heroes are scared too. They've never really faced a disaster of this level. So ultimately what you have to understand is that the heroes are worthy of criticism, yes, but they are still worthy of understanding because they don't know what to do. And yeah, I will always make the joke, All Might's 50 years old and he still can't talk to a child. But, the paradox of being old is that while on one hand you should be wiser, on the other hand you're more stuck in your ways. So, ultimately this is one of those places where it's 100% all about the nuance of the situation. There's many things coming into any particular equation in Hero Academia, and you have to keep that in mind. But let's not just say that the heroes are blameless. The heroes forgot that Izuku was just a high school kid, and that is unfortunate. Good thing that we have Ochako here to give us the answer. And this is something I want to bring up in general. A lot of times, the easy way to argue against points within the manga is really to use another person's words. And the thing with stories and attention spans in general is that the last word is usually the correct word that people will remember. So if you ever have to make points against heroes, you really just have to bring up someone like Ochako to really point it out and to use her words, because people are a lot less likely to argue against the words of another character, especially when it comes later. With Ochako, you can do the same thing when it comes to Stain. This chapter is pretty much a good rebuttal in general to Stain. And anyone that really defends Stain's rhetoric, just bring up Ochako's rhetoric, and Ochako's rhetoric will most likely be able to fight it. Because again, Izuku is just a normal person like everyone else. The heroes don't need to be self-sacrificial all the time. They're doing their best. Page 10 is, I think, one of the easier pages. This is Ochako saying this place is his, and we see like the build-up. She's remembering how Nezu said what Hero Academia was to her. We then go into page 11 with Izuku falling onto the floor. This is the story of how he became the greatest hero. You also have Ochako pointing out it's a bad omen to trip and fall. I'm actually kind of concerned because that part, bringing up that it's a bad omen to trip and fall, Izuku's falling to his knees, that might be a bad omen. But it's a simple page, it's a setup page. I gotta say though, this page of the way that Ochako was drawn here, I'm still kind of not into it. I don't know what it is about this pose in general, but I'm not a fan. I think every other Ochako shot is wonderful. I'm not a fan. One thing I will say is that the simplicity of the flashback panel here is really good because it reminds you these people are kids. That panel, they look very kid-like. Then we have page 12 and 13 is overall this place is his hero academy. Let him stay here. It's unfortunate that oh my god, I'm just noticing. Look at this girl. Look at this. She's the speck compared to the rest of UA. How are they hearing her? I could fit, oh my goodness, that speck. I think I can fit 10 of her per each window plane. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. Over 80 Ochakos. If they were to stand up on each other, they would get to the top. Oh, this is ridiculous. Whose idea was this? This is a horrible visual. How loud is that speaker? How is she hearing? All right. Whatever. Page 15 is Izuku crying. And then we go, sorry, page 14 is Izuku crying. Page 15 is the giant lady coming out there. Now, here is where you can tell that the author has too many rhetorics going on in one page, because you have two different forms of narration happening at once. Izuku starts up, I think, and also this is the story of how we became the greatest heroes. But first, you have the woman running out, right? Also, you see this guy from the first chapter looking out. Nezu then says, "One step away, try as it might, humanity struggles to make true progress." And he's bringing up the one step, right? Okay, so here's the cool thing about these pages. Nezu is looking out, not at Ochako, but at the people who are running. He sees this girl running one step away, and then on page 16, what do you see? You see a step. That is beautiful. That is masterful. Good on the author. And ultimately, I think what should really be seen here, and this is something I talk about in the other video, is that it's about the continuous sequence of steps. Because of Ochako's step, because she carved the path, Kota was able to walk out towards Izuku. And this is, again, something I cover in the other video, but Kota is only able to walk out towards Izuku because Izuku took steps to try and understand Kota. See, the thing with Nezu is that his rhetoric is so wide, and it starts from like the most basic place, that you can apply a lot of the rhetoric to everyone else in the story. So when you ultimately see Kota running out there, that step is linked to the one step. It's the next step after Ochako's step. Because now his step is probably going to bring more people into being willing to understand Izuku. Now, mind you, because of the one-step rhetoric, that step could have happened anywhere. But again, you have to value Ochako's place in the progression. She goes up, she carves the path. Kota goes in there, he carves the next step of the path. We have the wonderful flashback of how he was inspired by Izuku. Ooh, almost teared up. Oof. All right, sentimental. Get older, get sentimental. You move on, and you then see Kota and the giant lady coming in, and you have this is a story how we all became the greatest heroes, and Izuku has fallen. That's pretty good. People pointed out that was a parallel to like how Izuku fell in front of All Might, and you can say like this is Izuku being validated. You know, for me, that one didn't really hit me, but I see the parallel there. I can see the form. I kind of want to just say that this is like what Izuku looks like when he... I want to say this is what Izuku looks like when he cries in general, but it's probably like significant. It's probably a significant thing. Like pretty much Izuku just got validated. I think it's fine. Seeing Kota and the giant lady run in to help him, I'm sure that's going to bring more people to want to help Izuku as well. As to now the final rhetoric, that being the story of how we all became the greatest heroes, I don't think that's just talking about Class 1A, especially not when the civilians are being asked so much. At the end of the day in Hero Academia, we need to get to a point where everyone is willing to do little acts of heroism. We don't need everyone fighting on the streets. We just need people being nice people. That's all we pretty much want. So I think how we all became the greatest heroes, I think this is how every single person did their part to add to the bigger whole that is society. Mind you, it could also be pointed to just the students, but honestly, when you see Kota stepping out there to help his hero, come on. Kota's being a hero right now. He's being Izuku's hero by recognizing his efforts. So I think that is a perfectly fine rhetoric. We're 47 minutes in. There's still a little bit more to cover. Overall, though, I gotta say, in terms of the visuals, amazing chapter, super amazing chapter. I can't talk about Kota too much because it's gonna get me again. But we made a joke on live stream. I just want to tell you the joke. But if I would love it if All For One, that giant dick personified, comes in and he starts talking about like the cynicism, and he starts talking about how people just want to have power over each other. If Ochako stands up against him and says no, people help people. If Ochako does that against All For One and she wins the rhetoric battle, yo, that would be an actually great moment. I would really, really appreciate it. Anyway, though, overall, that was chapter 324 of My Hero Academia. I think there was something else I wanted to tell, but Kota kind of knocked my thoughts out of there. Yeah, I can't think of it. Ultimately, though, like, it's a masterful chapter because of how many things have to go into fixing Ochako and making sure that her rhetoric comes out and it's understandable. I think the author made many choices that indicate that he's aware of like some of the weaknesses, and he's aware of what needs to be conveyed. I think the final answer was ultimately nuanced enough that I am happy with it, and I think other things in the chapter, they end up working really, really well. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I was really passionate about it, and I hope that came through. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.